Very much, Emma. We're going to move on to our next research program, which is the Dictionary of Irish Biography. We have Turlo and Angela, so it's going to be a duo.
Thank you, Jen. And that was a fascinating talk by Emma. I mean, I've been here in the academy for well over 20 years, and I didn't know how much was in the library. To that extent, like, it's amazing, and there's new work being done, sort of surfacing it and presenting it and repackaging it, if I may use that word. I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about the DIB, or the Dictionary of Irish Biography in general. Talk about what it encompasses, what it includes, what it doesn't include, and then just demonstrate our online platform very simply, the search. And then my colleague, Dr. Angela Murphy, is going to dive a little deeper. She's one of your tribes, so I think she'll be able to speak more usefully to you. So I'm standing on a creaky part of the floor, and I'll just take it from there. Okay, so my name's Turlo O'Riordan. I work on the DIB. I've been involved since around 2000, and as you've noticed, I probably refer to it as a DIB. These are some of our beautiful, I think, hard copy volumes. We published the dictionary initially in 2009 in 9 volumes, and at the same time, the content, the same entries were published on what we used to call a website by Cambridge University Press at that time. And since then, the project has considerably evolved as the digital humanities and the publishing environment and the scholarly environments have changed. I love to see the slightly worn and hard copy, but it's really an anachronism, if not a museum piece. It's all about the online presence now and how we publish and undertake our work. This is quite a long spiel that I won't read out, but a much better way of describing what the DIB is a fine phrase that I love to use that comes from our founding managing editor, fantastic editor and historian, James Aguirre. It collects the famous, the infamous, and the forgotten. So we're up to around 11,000 lives in the dictionary, and that spans, and I'll go on to this now, the earliest times to the present day. But listening to Emma speak there, we have all the major saints. We have many people are in the Dugan collection. There's almost it's almost hard to find somebody who you feel should be in there who isn't. But we're always open to suggestions. So this little video was put together about 18 months ago, I think, and get the cursor. I'll just let it do the talking for about 90 seconds. Okay, so I doubt there's much rock music ever played in this room, but it's certainly eye-catching and grabs the attention and might be useful when you go into rooms with younger people. It's 81 seconds. I digress. So who's in the DIB? We cover the island of Ireland from the earliest times to the present day. We treat people from the earliest times, including mythical figures, Finn McCool, Deirdre the Sorrows, and so forth. Saints, Bridget's obviously there, and so forth. Columkill, right up to the present day. At the moment, there's about a 7-8 year gap between people dying and then being considered for inclusion in the dictionary. That gap has grown, and that's quite useful. You need to have a little bit of distance to get context. And then the broad parameters for inclusion are those born in Ireland with a career here, born here with a career overseas, and then people born overseas who come to Ireland. Good examples would be obviously De Valera was born in New York. Gladstone visited twice but didn't really live here, although he's hugely impactful on Irish history. So he doesn't have an entry. Robert Peel does because he was chief secretary, and so forth. We don't include second generation. You have to have Irish parents. To be born here, that often gets asked. I like that map because it sort of presents Ireland facing down, and it just shows you how maps can be misleading, although HTA will no doubt tell you there's more to it. I wanted to just demonstrate one entry, and I picked Jack Lynch mainly because he's smoking a pipe, and I like that. But we don't have images for everyone, so it's been sort of a new part of our work to include images that are open access when we can. RT are brilliant; they're very kind in sharing their wonderful, primarily black and white photo archive. So an entry is organised by surname, again imagined in a hard copy context, forenames, birth and diminutives kind of thing. Career descriptor. I think he won 7 All Irelands. Mostly as a footballer, one with the hurl, I think, and he was obviously then Taoiseach. So it gives a chronological account of the person, their origins, their education, their formation. Entries range in about 600 or 800 words, right up to 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 words. So they're very, very deep and detailed where necessary for major cultural or historical figures. Often they're just giving an insight into an interesting but lesser well-known life, and there might be less known about them. On the right, and it's slightly laid out differently on our site, we give just a captured metadata box, which basically shows you the data associated with the entry, which then informs how people can search. So we capture gender, career, religion where known, birth and death dates, and so on. Within an entry, any mention of another person who has a DIB entry, it's a hyperlink or a QV, so you can click through. It's really interesting. Jack's wife, Maureen, has an entry in her own right, which is quite interesting. Where there's multiple people with the same name, there's actually 6, if not 7, William O'Brien's in the DIB. We give the dates. But again, it's a hard copy project living in an online world, so there's oddities in that sense. What's interesting about the QVs is sometimes you can tell a story. I'm going to touch on place, but I think you're all going out into localities. People are very attached to where they are, where their parents are from, where their grandparents are. And that can be a route into the DIB, and then getting almost a foothold and moving on. On the left is our home screen. You can get straight into search with a surname or a forename. You can browse by surnames. Hardly anyone does. Some people like that. And on the right, you can click through to our advanced search screen, names, places, gender, and then the different attributes you can kind of mix and match. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. What's really interesting about text search is you can use proper nouns, place names, and so forth. That can be a good entry into the local. I'm so used to seeing it and using it, I don't know how to explain it that well, but just play with names and places and institutions, and you'd be surprised what will come up. Again, just an insight into the search. You can mix and match, say you want to know all Protestant doctors who were born in Cork or something like that. You can just tie them up together in a faceted search. We have about 48 career descriptors, about 13 religions, and then you can search by contributor. That's the author of the entry. About 800 people, I think, have contributed to the DIB over the years as an in-house team, and there was experts employed in various areas. So there's a wide range of contributors, often deep experts in their domain, professionals, amateurs. So some of the depth there is quite interesting. And then your search results, you can sort them and play with birth, death, and flower with dates. Flower being when someone flourishes. I just want to, before I hand over to Angela, who will give you much better insight, talk about place. I was born in Cork, lived in various parts of Dublin, now live in Kildare. I lived overseas for a lot of my childhood. I'm amazed about how local Ireland's conception of itself is, the townland, the parish, the village. It's still hugely important to people, and it's a great way to play with the dictionary because you get mentions of place, and that can interest people, I found. And on that, I just want to touch on, say, Grangegorman. Catherine's going to talk about Grangegorman Histories. Just putting Grangegorman in, some of the search results, you can't quite see it there, and that's Noel Brown, Noel Christopher Brown, Christy Byrne, Thomas Daly. Now, that's an institution in Dublin and also an area, but it just gives you a sense of how places are mentioned and tied in. For those of you who don't know, Loganim, it's an amazing resource, one of the amazing resources that Finter and DCU publish, Place Names Database. It's incredibly interesting on so many levels. I'm not a geographer, but I'm really interested in the data that surrounds place names and how it's been curated and collected. And it's a great resource. Again, I think these slides are going to be shared, so they'll all be put across. And I'll just hand over to Angela now. I'll give you much deeper insight. We'll take some questions.
Thanks a million, Turlo, and lovely to see everybody here. My name is Angela Byrne. I'm a historian and I work part-time with the Dictionary of Irish Biography as an editor, but I'm also on the Heritage and Schools panel just since last year, a newbie. I know some people have been doing it for years. So what I wanted to look at just for the second half of the presentation about the DIB is the role of local material, because what I have found so far in doing the sessions in schools is that the more local it is, when I do the history with the pupils and with their teachers, the more local it is, the better, and the more it will kind of grab them. So I would get very granular with the local history sessions I do with them. I go down to the level of looking at individual streets and piecing together histories of individual streets and even sometimes individual buildings using loads of different free online resources. And I've just pulled together a few different examples to show you of how I would do that, but leading with the DIB and then adding on the other free resources. So you'll see what I mean as I go through. And the other thing I wanted to focus on when talking to you is just looking at the primary school history curriculum. The bit that I always keep in mind when I'm doing the sessions, because it's just my approach when I'm working with the pupils, is the story strand. So the stories of lives and people in the past, and the Dictionary of Irish Biography is obviously brilliant for that strand. The biographies, as Turlo already indicated, they're written largely by academic researchers, professional researchers, or non-professional researchers, but who have great expertise in the life or the field of work of the person whose biography they're writing. They're aimed at a kind of a researcher audience and the adult general audience. So when you're using the DIB to pull together material for primary school kids, you'll have to do a fair bit of parsing yourself. You wouldn't be fit to just say print them out and show them on the screen. I'd say they're way too advanced for primary school pupils. So it's as a resource for you to kind of take away the information, and you know that the information in the biographies is, generally speaking, authoritative and correct. Although if you do find a mistake in there, please do let us know. We're open to receiving that. I'd say as well, if you're working with Gael Scoilina, we have cross-references in the DIB. Any lives that are in the DIB that are also featured on annium.ie. They're the Irish language biographical dictionary run through Fianter at DCU. We've cross-referenced with them, so you could also access some of the lives in Irish language biogs. So another thing I wanted to look at, just in the few examples that I pulled out from the site to show you what we can do and the potential of the DIB for the primary schools, is to look at the themes that the lives prompt, to prompt classroom discussion. Again, thinking about people's stories and people's lives. It's one of the things I like to get the pupils to do is in the local history sessions, I'll often use the ducas.ie site, the folklore collection. And I ask the pupils to think, well, in 50 years when you're big, if a boy or a girl knocks on your door and says, my teacher asked me to do a local history project, what stories will you tell them about your life? And they absolutely love that. And the stuff they come up with is crazy. They'll be talking about COVID and stormophilia, and then some of them will talk about, you know, when they went to see a football match with one of their parents or something. So the richness is lovely. And some of them will talk about, oh, our local team won the GAA championship or whatever. And it's just lovely. And you get an insight into their wee worlds as well and get to know them a wee bit better. So the last thing I want to say before I go into the actual examples is that sources is part of the curriculum. And just as a professional historian, sources are like in my bones. They're my bread and butter. It's the building block of everything I do. And I would be very clear with the pupils about the sources that we're using, where they come from, and ask them to think about how you can put different sources together. So photographic sources added to map sources, added to textual sources, and how you build your story up by layering all your different sources together. Think about the advantages and the shortcomings of the different sources, and they really get into that as well. So I'm going to start with, I had just done a screen grab, demonstrating the search. Turlo's already given you a lot of insight into the site, but if you land on our homepage and you go into advanced search, you then have the ability to search across a lot of different ranges, full text for specific terminology by contributor. I said, what will happen if I go by place of birth and place of death? I'm from Donegal. I do a lot of work in Donegal, so I put Donegal as place of birth. And then I selected any place of death because I want to leave it as open as possible, maybe people who travelled around the world. So the different results I get for people born in Donegal, I got 130. I can refine those results by gender, by religion, or career. So I said, let's go by career. So I'm just going to expand the list. They appear there in descending order by frequency. So most people from Donegal in the dictionary had careers in the realm of religion, then politics, and goes down from there. I went in, first of all, to science and technology. I have 6 results now. That's a bit more manageable. There's a nice spread of male and female careers, and I chose Pearl Dunleavy. So she was a doctor and an epidemiologist, and she's most notable for leading a childhood vaccination programme that reduced deaths by tuberculosis in Dublin's children by 80% in the 1950s. So an extraordinary person who made a serious contribution to Irish life. So then I said, I'll look at the other freely available online resources to see how can I round out the picture of Pearl's life when discussing it with the kids. So the first thing I did was look at the census on the National Archives. They're freely available for 1901 and 1911. Anybody can go in and search them. A lot of you might be already familiar with them. But you can download the high-res forms. And I've used these sources with pupils in the classroom to discuss who was living on a particular street in their town in 1901 or 1911. And you can prompt conversations about the sorts of careers that men and women had, the sorts of profiles that are coming up, how many children they had, all that sort of thing. But you can see Pearl, her given name was actually Margaret, so she's down there as Margaret Bridget Dunleavy, and she was just a baby at the time. But you could talk about her family's position as grocers in their small village. And then looking at her later career, the National Library of Ireland's Flickr account, I cannot recommend highly enough. The search on it probably could be a wee bit better. You get too many results, I find, but it's well worth having a browse through, and even just for yourself if you're just interested in history. And every photograph they put up there is free for people to use as long as they credit the National Library. So you don't have to go looking for permission or anything. It's absolutely stellar resource. So I pulled up a photograph from there of Michael's Lane in Dublin. That's from the early 20th century, and you can use that to illustrate a discussion about the conditions that Pearl was working in when she was working on these vaccination programs in the poorest parts, one of the poorest parts of Europe, indeed, in the early 20th century, the tenement life of the children in Dublin. And you can see some of them gathered there playing on the street corner. You can see the washing lines hanging out from the tenement flats on the 2nd and 3rd floors of those buildings, and prompt a discussion about things like child poverty in early 20th century Ireland, the conditions of living in the cities, and refer to things like the photographs. The other resource you can use to round out Pearl's life a bit more and build your own background context before going into the classroom is the Dictionary of Irish Biography blogs. And they're easy to find up on our webpage. And we have a good range of thematic blogs up there, but one you could refer to for preparing a session where you use Pearl as an example is our 2-part blogs about women in the sciences in the 19th century. So it's a wee bit earlier, but it'll still give you valuable background context. To give a second example of material, I went back in again to do another search for people born from Donegal, and this time I selected the career of sport. And the example that came up was Dave Gallagher or Gallagher. Some of you may know that name already, especially if you're into sport. He was the first All Blacks rugby captain. He was he led the All Blacks to their first big success and put them on the map as an international rugby team. He emigrated from Donegal to New Zealand when he was 5 with his family. And it was in New Zealand that he got into rugby. So just looking at other online resources from reputable Irish public organisations that we can use to round out his life, I found his birth record really easily. It doesn't happen that easily for everybody, but his was really easy to find on irishgenealogy.ie, and that's run by the Department of Culture, Sport, etc., and is freely available for everybody online. And again, you can download a high-res PDF, and it's just very interesting again to see that actual record capturing where his family were at the time he was born. So it gives his father's profession as shopkeeper. Jumping off from that and thinking about what was that family standard living in Ramelton, in a kind of a port town in Donegal in the late 19th century. Going into the Ordnance Survey maps. And again, you'll be able to get the links to all these in the pack and by looking back on the slides afterwards. But looking at the Ordnance Survey map of around 1900 that was made you know, the closest to his date of birth, looking at the town around Melton and the exact street where he was born. Let's go a step further and again go to the National Library of Ireland's historic photograph collection, and we have a photograph looking across the river to the street where he was born. We know that his father was a shopkeeper. We can see from the map that the town has these lovely long quays going along the river, and we get a photographic representation of that now. So we can add the three sources together and have a discussion maybe of what it's like to live in a port town in Ireland in the late 19th century. Start thinking about, you're talking a lot about global, but it's also local, but it's also very global. So a wee town like this has global international connections, especially through the North Atlantic and trade with Canada, and of course, the mass migration of people to America. The fact that Dave migrated to New Zealand when he was 5 with his family, we could have a conversation about Irish migration, use this as a jumping off point about migration. What was life like on the crossing in the months and months that it took to get to New Zealand? What was life like on the ship? What was it like when they got to New Zealand? And New Zealand's quite a nice example as well, because some of the kids I find grow up in houses where history is talked about a lot, and some of them might have an awareness that Irish people went to America or England, but they might know that Irish people went to New Zealand, and that especially Irish Protestants went there. So we can have, you know, we can go as deep and as niche into the conversation as we want, jumping off from these sources. And then another more maybe contemporary discussion would be to have around the theme of sport and inclusivity. So as a migrant family, one of the ways into New Zealand life for the Gallaghers was through sport. He and his brother both played sports. His brother played cricket. He played rugby. How does that help people to integrate into their communities? How are people welcomed through things like sport? And then the last example I want to give you, I went back into my results of people born in Donegal and died anywhere, and I selected travel and exploration. And I got very few results, but one of the nice ones was Mickey McGowan. He was the Klondike miner, and some of you might know the book, The Hard Road to Klondike. That was given, he gave that memoir orally, and it was published after his death. It's one of the most important memoirs by a native Gaeilgeoir for the 20th century, late 19th and early 20th century. He was destitute in childhood. He was sent away to the Higher and Fair, and anybody working in the schools around kind of the border counties, the Higher and Fair is something I've discussed with kids in the classroom. They find it absolutely fascinating, and it is particularly Ulster thing that went on into the 1950s. Having a look in your local library or local museum collections, they often have posters for the Higher and Fairs. They'll often have the railways hung them up outside and said, you know, we'll have services running to the Higher and Fair on this date at these times. So you can really get into it on a local level, especially in Ulster and border counties. But he was sent away to the Higher and Fair at the age 8. Then he went to Scotland, Tatty Hoken, at the age of 14. And when he was 19, he headed to America, and he ended up on the gold fields in the Klondike, famously. And he made enough money to move back to Donegal and buy a whole estate. So he's, you know, real kind of success story, right? But we can dig down further into his early life. We could go to buildingsofireland.ie and find the picture of Chackwickie, his actual cottage where he was born, and get a glimpse inside the cottage. We can have a discussion about what life was like in the 19th century Irish cottage for people like Mickey and his family. And actually in ducas.ie, in the schools collection, there are some sketches by the children of the 1930s showing the simple furniture and implements and the ground layout of their own cottages. So I've worked with those as well, and with pupils, and I've got them to draw, you know, objects from their own houses and compare as well, and do wee exercises like what objects belong in the cottage. So I've put random iPads and PlayStations and different things, and then, you know, the churn and the settle bed, and they say what belongs and what doesn't belong. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do with these visual sources. The children could have a discussion again about migration. What was it like for people emigrating to America in the 19th century? What was life like when they got there? And think as well about drawing the route that he walked across America to the Klondike on a map, and discuss what that was like. So just to kind of draw to a close, because I don't want to overwhelm you with stuff, but just to give some quick ideas of how I might start formulating a session based on what I find in the DIB relative to one local area. There are just a few brief examples of how to explore local stories of people's lives in the past using the DIB, and then building on the reputable free resources from other Irish organisations and repositories. So you can see the potential in the DIB to look at themes, areas of work, geographical areas with the pupils, and then just marry up the other digital resources to give it that bit of depth and prompt classroom activities with the pupils as well. Thanks a million. So
are together. How do you?
when I do my local history sessions, yeah, it depends. Like the local history session, I kind of mix it up. I'd start by showing them maybe the earliest map of their town. It's usually an ordnance survey map from about 1830. And then I'll show them the aerial view of what that is. And I normally try and pick the area around their school. They'll know that area really well, especially for the areas that are very now urbanised and built up, and it can be hard to visualise. But like an example out in Ratoath, where their school, the school I was in there one day back in May, was a field in 1830, and there was 110 people living in the village of Ratoath. Now there's 10 or 12,000. And even just to put those figures up on the screen and then show them the map from 1830, the aerial view for today, and that's then we kick off the session. And I'd have printouts of the map. So what I'd often get them to do is compare the first ordnance survey map from the online resource and then the next one. So there's about a 70-year gap, and get them to pick out 3 things that are the same, 3 things that have changed. And then we discuss some of the features. So they might ask a question. I'd very much let it be led by them then. They ask a question about a building, or what was that, or why is there a circle in that field? And we'll start talking about it, and we'll build it out from there. But I would mix up, I'd show them something, get them to do an activity, then show them something else and get them to do another one.
You know, the buildings of Ireland?
Yeah.
Because you can search by place name, which I find easier than searching for the name of a building, but you can also search by map.
Yeah.
Great, because you can bring up the local areas with all of the historic structures and buildings on that map, and it really works because you can see it and you can show them what the map looks like today, and it shows the map of today with the historic sites on it, and then you click into it and look at the details and the record of those sites. So it's great.
Absolutely right. And if I remember well, the dots on the map are color coded.
They are
for different sorts of sites. Yeah.
According to the type of structure you're looking at, whether it's say a motte, a bailey, or say an 18th century cottage. It's color coded according to chronology really, and time and structure type. So it's a great resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know Trafford you very well, but because I learned my Irish in Mahroad and worked there. But what I wanted to know was, I did some work with Gillen on Ellen Horry, and in terms of the information we have available about sort of the mainland, is that replicated by the islands around Ireland? Is it as easy to get information, good quality information about the islands of Donegal, Galway, Kerry?
That is such a great question, and I'm afraid I don't have a very good answer for you, but I will have a look and I will try and grab you before the end of the day. That's a great question. Yeah, I haven't had any bookings from any of the islands, and I'm actually not sure I'd be in a position, just with the travel difficulties, and you could get stuck there. But I'll have a look for you. That's a great question. Thank you. Okay.
I'm just really interested. I haven't engaged in any of this debate, but I'd really love to know more, how rich learn into the detail of the islands.
Thanks for a great question.
want, we can have a cup of tea and a cup of coffee, and maybe continue a chat with Angela and Turlo, and we'll resume back here in case of people. 20 minutes.